By the way, if I look really dopey, it's because I'm tired. Again, I haven't been sleeping very well, not at all last night, so I'm just really tired and I really struggled to get through this video, so I apologize. Hello, today is August 22nd, 2018, and time is 1:36 p.m. Just wanted to do a video about something that's been in the background, kind of haunting my case, and it has no merit, but I just wanted to share this with you because, one, the topic that this will be addressing affects all of society and all the problems that we're seeing in society, for example, with the feminist movement, which is really about the beta and omega females competing with the alpha females for equality. And unfortunately, males have become a victim as a byproduct of that struggle. That's not to say that some women don't have an issue and they're feminists with men, whatever, but really that's what it's all about. And we see the same thing with the incel movement with men. So I mean, I've done a video on this. A lot of what I'm talking about, the details, there's other videos on this, so please feel free to check them all out. I don't want to get into the details, repeating it over and over and chewing up time on this video. So what this video is going to talk about is how the local courts with my case and the police have tried to impose or get me to willingly accept a mental health issue. Now, before I get into all that, I'm going to give a backstory to my history with regards to that. No, I don't have a history. So they're trying to, or they were threatening to say that I was unstable for trial once I took over my trial about midway through, which doesn't even make sense. When I fired my second lawyer, he had told me that. He said this is what they're going to try to do. So in the next batch of materials that I did file with the courts, I did bring that up. And I mean, you don't go halfway through a court and, oh well, we don't want this guy representing himself, because they know that I was taking the gloves off. So anyway, this narrative began, I remember, when I was talking to my first lawyer about why I was with the female and saying, I have everything documented and everything else. And he said to me, he goes, well, people are going to think that you're a nutter for doing that, which, something, it paid off. And yeah, I don't regret doing that. If anyone else is being threatened or whatever of an accusation, do what you have to do to protect yourself. And even with the second lawyer, I do have post-traumatic stress from this event, and I'm hyper-stressed because this has been dragging on for so long and waiting for decisions and so many letdowns and everything else. And I've said in other videos, I don't sleep well at night, sometimes not at all. And I remember I even emailed the second lawyer a few times in the middle of the night, and he's like, and he'd be like, well, what kind of person, what's wrong with you? You're mentally sick or something for emailing in the middle of the night. And I'm looking at him like, what the hell difference does it make? Mind you, what I was emailing him was facts about the case, which he ended up not wanting to use. He didn't use, which is one of the problems that I've had. So this whole idea with the courts and the police trying to make me look like I'm crazy, it's just a way to try to debunk me. Here's an example. So when the former officer, he's not an officer anymore, who sucker punched me through the window of my vehicle, he testified to sucker punching me and knocking me out. While I was knocked out, I have no recollection of what happened. I can't testify to what happened. But it was around that time when I was coming to, I realized that I had a hold of the officer's wrist because he was choking me. I couldn't breathe. A natural reaction. This is what the assault police officer was originally based on. I mean, I don't know, it's changed. You know, I was breathing the same air as him type of bullshit. So anyway, the judge, so when I was being cross-examined both times, the Crown prosecutor was trying to say, well, do you have a history of blanking out and all this stuff? And I'm like, no. And so in the end, the judge said that I provided no evidence that someone who was knocked out cannot recall anything. So in other words, what, he wanted an expert witness? Everyone has to remember, this is a misdemeanor case. It should have been done and over with in one afternoon, but it wasn't. It took over 3.5 years to get a conviction. So all of a sudden, it's like going to for a traffic ticket and needing an expert witness type of thing. And I've noticed over the years, anytime somebody new has come along and have become part of the case, and say they've talked to me for a bit, they say the strangest things like, you know, I don't think that there's anything wrong with you mentally. And I'm looking at them like out of the blue, they say that, and like, why would you think otherwise? So this tells me that this rumor or gossip, like a bunch of busybodies, is just spreading around, trying to discredit me any way that they can. And it's frustrating and it's hurtful. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to review other videos on the topic of the mental health industry and other people in the profession. You know, some people have spent their whole life in that profession. They're talking against the mental health field. So this video is really going to be focusing on that, and as I'm going through the videos I'm going to pause and make comments. But before I get into doing that, I want to just share a little bit of the backstory of before I came out here and how that contrasts with what the courts and the police are trying to make me be like today. So I went through a really hard period, which really started around 2009. Really, like, I hit rock bottom. Nothing like what I'm dealing with now, but I hit rock bottom. And that lasted for a few years. And, you know, I was couch surfing, staying at different friends' house or friends of a friend, and it was hard. And, you know, sometimes, a lot of times in my vehicle. And anyway, I was trying to get myself out of that situation. I had left law on my own for personal reasons, nothing to do with anything. It was just, I talk about that briefly in other videos. I had to get myself out of that situation. So what I ended up coming across was a government program that helped people. Now, I wasn't eligible for the program because I already had post-secondary and everything else, but somebody who I got to know thought, you know, I've done accomplished a lot in my life, so I would be perfect, although I didn't really qualify. So one of the requirements for that program was to have mental health assessments, because it's really geared for people far worse than I was. You know, like your typical homeless person. So actually I had 3 assessments, and all 3 assessments, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm fine. One person said that, you know, all you need to do is get back on your game and, you know, whatever, and things that I already knew. So I went through with the program. They had paid for some more schooling, which ironically was geared towards the mental health field. Now, I want to just stop there about this. Around 2007, I knew someone personally close who was a victim of the mental health industry, and I was trying to help them, and I started making inquiries. And I had two individuals in that profession approach me on their own separately, and basically in two different facilities, but they were connected, tell me that, you know, and they said, well, we'll deny it if you speak of this, that this person was being experimented on with experimental drugs and all sorts of stuff. And this totally floored me. I was in a position that I was allowed to ask for medical records, and they kept delaying it until they finally said, well, we don't have any medical records. I'm like, well, you have to. If you do anything, even an aspirin or whatever, you have to have medical records. They didn't have anything. So I started pushing it. Now at that time, I was still in law, and so I started really applying. I was doing some research and stuff on that, and they ended up saying that I would have to talk to their team of lawyers. Anyway, I don't want to get into that story too much. And that subsequently, sometime after that person had passed away. So I just wanted to share that, so it gives an explanation as to why around 2007, 2008, I became very vocal speaking out against the mental health industry. And ironically, I ended up getting into schooling. It was the schooling that I did because of my background. I was able to, what I was actually aiming for was something a little bit different, but whatever. So I worked in the mental health industry, and I have first-hand knowledge from that perspective of what really goes on and the hardships that people face by being part of that system. So when I actually had finished the whole program, I had that last assessment, I was fine, moved across country, and which ultimately led to the situation with what I'm dealing with now. So what I would like to do now is start reviewing these other videos, and I'm going to pause and make some comments tying it in either, for example, to my case or society, feminism, whatever it fits. So that's what I'm going to do right now. So this video is called Marketing of Madness. It's really about the drugs that they use in the mental health industry.
Modern institutional psychiatry has depended on psychotropic drugging since its earliest beginnings in insane asylums during the 19th century. During that period, psychiatrists functioned almost exclusively as attendants, promising to cure the seriously mentally ill. But as they could not, they were not regarded by mainstream medicine
So
as
I'm
real
going to pause it
doctors.
here when they're talking about mainstream medicine and how the origins of this alleged profession of psychology, they couldn't help people, and they still don't help people. And what psychologists don't tell people, and what people don't realize, especially, it's difficult when somebody is going through some really serious trauma or whatever, that people actually help themselves. And if you're able to, you know, as a third person, saying, if you're in a conversation with one, they're just sitting there listening to you, and regurgitating the last thing you said, and then through that process, it's basically just like venting. So you can talk to a tree and get the same effect. But I just wanted to highlight that about the history of the mental health profession.
Other physicians considered psychiatrists as almost a doctor, okay, because they weren't doing medical stuff. So to increase their status, they needed to become much more scientific.
They need to prove that this is a legitimate scientific field. This is a legitimate medical profession. So they start medicalizing everything.
Just want to stop there about them saying that they medicalize everything. What they've done was they've taken observation. So they'll observe somebody or a group, and then everything after that is all theory, like a philosophy. So you have, it's no better than philosophy if you think about it, because there's no right or wrong. And a lot of people are attracted to that, to those studies, because it's easy. You just basically got to bullshit your way through, and as long as you're making sense, and this is part of the reason why society today is in demise, because you have these kind of people who have become the majority and obtain positions of perceived authority. People listen to them, and here we go. We have people pouring bleach in their eyes because they identify as a blind person. Like, I mean, the insanity that follows. So that's what I just wanted to say about that.
To control behavioral outbursts amongst inmates, psychiatrists employed early psychotropic drugs, such as morphine and opium. But contrary to their claims, these drugs cured nothing and proved to be highly addictive. This led to a whole new generation of dependence, a solution far worse than the original problem. But the attempts to control objectionable behavior continue.
Just going to pause there. Another thing to focus on about objectionable behavior, who decides that? Now, other videos are going to have other people talking about who decides that, and if it's even a real thing. Again, I'm not going to be talking about the extreme cases, because there's also an extreme case that defies mainstream. So,
And by the turn of the 20th century, phony cures for mental illness, such as heroin, could be found being peddled throughout the United States and Europe.
these are the drugs that they
Even
used to use.
psychologist Sigmund Freud
And now they
played
just
a
have
major role in
drugs
the
that do no
creation of
better.
the cocaine industry in the Western world, writing many glowing articles promoting its use for spiritual distress and behavioral difficulties.
So that's that video.
Freud is it.
It was more of an introduction, so this is a talk in 2006.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor to receive this award tonight, named for my dear friend and colleague, Thomas Szasz. As Thomas Szasz wrote years ago, the only true political virtue is obedience to authority, and the only true political sin is
So I'm going to pause
independence.
there on independence. Not a very big point, but what I was saying earlier about obedience to authority, what I'm doing, trying to vindicate myself from an injustice imposed by authority, this is why they see me as a pain in the ass, or they're angry, or frustrated, or they just want to discredit me with any means possible.
Independence renders authority useless, and that is what infuriates it so. You've undoubtedly been told you're mentally ill for daring to say that the emperor called psychiatry has no clothes, not to mention stupid and unscientific. At least this is what some of my colleagues say about me at one university. So if this is something that has happened to you, I'm here to say that you're not alone. The controversy regarding the myth of mental illness and psychiatry is not about science or medicine, it's about power. When psychiatrists start agreeing with you, well then perhaps you ought to reconsider your position. Something may be wrong. So I'd like to say a few disobedient things, which is especially true because I was trained as a psychologist, and when a member of the profession criticizes its own, it's considered especially sacrilegious. What do we know that is true, that the cult of psychiatry keeps telling us is false? First, the idea that there is a known brain lesion causing mental illness. The truth is, we cannot tell who is mentally ill and who is not by looking at pictures of their brains or analyzing their blood. Psychiatrists had to invent their own book of diseases because pathologists would have nothing to do with them. It's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, the DSM, a great work of fiction.
I like this guy.
What's the difference? What's the difference between the DSM and a scientific book of disease? Every disorder in the DSM is invented. Every disease listed in a pathology textbook is discovered. Real disease is found in a cadaver at autopsy. Mental illness is not. Mental illness refers to something that a person does. Real disease refers to something that a person has. Consider this yet another way. It takes one person to have a real disease. It takes two people to have a mental illness.
Very true.
If you're alone on an island, you could develop a real disease like cancer or heart disease, but you cannot develop a mental illness such as hyperactivity or schizophrenia. This is because mental illness is always diagnosed on the basis of some sort of social conflict. When people do something that others find objectionable, they can be diagnosed as mentally ill. If the person doing the diagnosing is more powerful than the person diagnosed, then there is trouble. In this sense, the diagnosis of mental illness is always a weapon. Not so when it comes to diagnosing real disease. Think of how, when people get angry with one another, they inevitably resort to some kind of diagnosis. They say, "You're crazy. You're mentally ill.
Yep.
You're paranoid." Can you imagine somebody getting angry with someone and saying, "You have diabetes. You have Parkinson's disease"? Social conflict has nothing to do with developing a real disease. You don't develop diabetes because someone doesn't like the way you think, speak, or behave. You have to have someone else present to judge that your behavior is morally good or bad in order to have a mental illness. So diagnosis is a weapon.
I just want to pause there for a moment with regards to a diagnosis being used as a weapon. So as, for example, in my case, the courts, the Crown Prosecutor, and the police are trying to use, say, for example, my getting knocked out, not remembering anything, or trying to any way to discredit me. So they are not liable and they don't have to answer for their mistakes. So this is where this topic has been a part of my case, a minor part, but just kind of drifting there below the surface throughout the trial. Now when you go look at society and stuff, the same thing applies with the feminist tactic, how they villainize each other as well as villainize men. And if you go against what's
a
being
tool
imposed.
people use against one another,
There's something wrong with your sex
especially when there is
experience,
some kind
whatever.
of power conflict present. And what of treatment? Treatment for mental illness is punishment. Look at our criminal justice system. When someone commits a crime and a psychiatrist is in the courtroom, a defendant may go to a mental institution instead of a prison. Can you imagine a judge saying, "I sentence you to treatment for your cancer"? I submit to you that psychiatric treatment is worse than prison.
He just said psychiatric treatment is worse than prison. Now, there's going to be a video coming up later where I'm going to go through where a speaker on TED Talks is actually talking about that, how he met someone who avoided jail on a mental plea, and rather than spend several years in jail, spent 16 years in a mental institution, and they knew that there was nothing wrong with them. But they made up a bunch of other stuff. That's actually pretty interesting to listen to. There was a couple of plea deal offers throughout my trial. After each time, there was 2 times the officers testified. The former officer testified twice, and there was a 15-month adjournment between the testimonies. The second time he testified along with his partner. His partner didn't really support him all that much. So there was, each time there was a plea deal, and I turned them down. Now, after that, it was suggested that to me, if I took a mental unfit deal, that they would make this whole thing go away. And by now I'm like, I just turned down 2 really sweet deals, like, you know, throughout the years. I'm definitely not going to take something as ridiculous as this. It just seems to be an underlying theme, and as this guy here is saying, it's being used as a weapon, either to manipulate somebody one way or another, or as a form of punishment.
For in prison, they don't judge how long people should be deprived of liberty on the basis of what they think about themselves and the world. In a mental institution, of course, this is the case. If you don't think about yourself and the world correctly, you'll be punished longer. Psychiatrists love to say that mental illness is a real disease, just like cancer. The analogy between mental illness and real disease is not reciprocal. It doesn't hold both ways. Having cancer is not like being depressed. We don't shock people who have cancer to make them better, especially if they don't want to be shocked. Consider how melanoma, a deadly form of skin cancer, is a disease here as well as in northern India. If you have melanoma, does it cease to exist if you move to another country, another culture? Of course not. If you're wandering the foothills of the Himalayas and meditating for 15 hours a day, you may very well be called a holy man in India. Take that same person, have him walk across the grounds of the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C., and he's diagnosed a paranoid schizophrenic and committed to a mental hospital. What do you think psychiatrists would do if Jesus were alive today? Or Buddha? Or Mohammed? Bada bing! Right into a mental hospital, injected with drugs to stop their crazy beliefs and speech. Psychiatrists today are the true Grand Inquisitors. They would crucify the holy men and women of yesterday in an instant.
So stopping that video there, moving on to the next one.
There's always been madness, but it wasn't until the 19th century that it came to be seen as a
Rosenhan
disease,
experiment.
to be managed
Always
by a
default to
group of
this one.
experts, psychiatrists. New asylums were built, their walls and bars marking the supposedly clear-cut boundary between the sane and the insane. But in 1887, an enterprising journalist called Elizabeth Cochrane, who wrote under the name of Nellie Bly, challenged this.
Nellie Bly was on a mission to test out psychiatry.
So what she did, she checked into a boarding house and she started pulling strange faces and tugging her hair out and saying everyone around her was crazy. And sure enough, it wasn't long before 2 doctors had her shipped off to the woman's lunatic asylum in New York.
I'm going to pause there for a second. Her going to New York. A lot of people, when I'm having a discussion with them and I bring up the Rosenhan experiment, especially you get this a lot from people who are studying this, and they're saying, "Oh, well, you're one experiment." Well, no, it's one experiment, the Rosenhan experiment, one experiment that's worth its weight in gold, but it's not the only one of its kind. As we're seeing here, this was done long before Rosenhan did his, and other people have done theirs, and it's time tested, it's worth its weight in gold. So if anyone's like, well, you know, that's just one experiment, this experiment proves the validity of what these so-called psychiatrists, shrinks, say. Like, they're just guessing. They apply their philosophy to it, and boom. And you know, when you look throughout history, a lot of people, they condemn those in history who say they take over land or, you know, conquer or whatever. And the first thing that the conquerors do is they get rid of the philosophers and these kind of people here, because they realize that by keeping them, it's not that there's a threat of intelligence. That's not even true. They realize that these kind of people actually create a demise in civilization. So when a conqueror comes in, usually a civilization, a culture, has already begun to crumble, and they're taken over. So anyway, I just want to...
Once inside, she behaved perfectly normally, but it made no difference. As she later wrote, the saner I acted, the crazier they thought I was. Her articles in her book, 10 Days in the Madhouse, showed just how easy it had been to fool the doctors, and just how terrible conditions were inside the asylum. 85 years later, a clinical psychologist called David Rosenhan would do much the same thing.
The anti-psychiatry movement was saying that perhaps we should see this in a different way.
Thomas Sachs argued that psychiatry was a pseudoscience, and the very idea of mental illness was a myth. Irving Goffman suggested that just being in a mental hospital was enough.
Pause there. So the whole notion of psychology being a pseudoscience is not something new, and it's not just a mere opinion of a few people. This is something that has been discussed and a concern from its conception. So, moving along.
Drive people insane. And R.D. Laing claimed that what psychiatry said was mental illness was just a rational response to an insane world. And so began one of the most notorious experiments ever conducted in psychology, an experiment from which psychiatry never quite recovered. Rosenhan and his confederates travelled to 12 hospitals in 5 different states in the US. To try to get a more representative sample, some of the hospitals were old, some new, some were short-staffed, others well-staffed. After calling for an appointment, the would-be patients presented themselves at the hospitals. They didn't act crazy like Nellie Bly had done, they just faked a single symptom.
Yes, when the pseudo patients turn up at the hospital, they would just say, I'm hearing a voice and it's saying to me, hollow, empty, thud. And the significance of this is that it doesn't represent any known symptom of a schizophrenic disorder. So it's quite unique, it's made up. No one would have encountered anything like this before.
So Rosenhan was giving the doctors a chance here, and apart from saying they heard the voice and giving a false ID, everything else the pseudo-patient said was true. Significant events in their life were described exactly as they'd been.
And then what happened?
They got all diagnosed as insane and been to the hospital.
All of them.
I just want to pause there, everyone being diagnosed as insane. Something that was said to me this past year was that I need to be taken off the conveyor belt of conviction. So I'm drawing a parallel here with the mental health world. Is once you're introduced to that world from a perspective, that's it. They lock you in. It's you know, like summoning demons or whatever, and they say, well, once you do it, you're stuck, right? The same with psychology. Once you step in the door, that's it, you're done. And with the legal system, it's the same type of thing. Once you get, somebody drags you in, then that's the label that they want to give you. It's the industry, and they want you to become the product. And it's very difficult to get out of that either system of psychology or the criminal justice system, because this is their bread and butter, and this is how they perceive you, and they will do everything that they can to make you look crazy or make you look like a criminal. I'll go back to...
Once admitted, the pseudo-patient stopped faking the symptom and behaved in the way they usually did, hence the title of the study, being sane in insane places. When asked by staff how they were feeling, they said they were fine. The symptom had disappeared, and could they please be released? So what was Rosenhan trying to do here?
There were two aims to the study. The first one, principally, was to investigate psychiatric labels as to whether these would be used in situations where they weren't appropriate.
So what did Rosenhan and his confederates find? How long would it take for their sanity to be detected by the staff? And what would they find out about life on the inside? How different were the mental hospitals of the 1970s from the madhouse of the 1890s described by Nellie Bly? Despite the fact that the hospitals chosen were not particularly bad ones, and the pseudo-patients behaved quite normally throughout their stay, none of them were ever detected by any member of the hospital staff. And this surprised even Rosenhan.
But I told friends, I told my family, I get out when it's when I get out. That's all. Be there for a couple of days and then I get out. Nobody knew I'd be there for 2 months.
This is not the full version of the video, obviously. What's interesting that's not shown here is after Rosenhan was released, the hospital had contacted him and said, well, we found 143 more of your test subjects and released them. And apparently Rosenhan said, we don't have anybody else. It just goes to show you, you know, people are putting their trust in this, your average person. And I'm sure a lot of professional type people in the higher up in the hierarchy of civilization, they realize all this. It's everyone else that just buys into it, and everyone else is the masses. So now we're going to do the next video.
So I want to talk a little bit about this thing called, variously, the mental health liberation movement, the anti-psychiatry movement, the movement against psychiatric oppression. However you want to call it. You know, a lot of people call it anti-psychiatry. But what's remarkable is that we do have this movement, and it's a liberation movement. It's a liberation against oppression. Oppression is a systematic mistreatment of members of a group simply because they're part of that group. In this case, called identified as a mentally ill person, right? So you have racism, oppression against people of color, sexism against women, gay and lesbian oppression, etc. And here we're talking about psychiatric oppression.
I was going to pause there on psychiatric oppression. He did mention feminism through sexism, which also opens up the door to men's rights movements and everything else, and this whole victimhood society that we are unfortunately in the middle of. So just wanted to highlight that part.
The purpose of oppression, first of all, in terms of basic oppression theory, is very important to just understand, and I'm not going to go into it here, but basically just understand that it's economically driven. You know, the purpose of dividing different groups of people amongst themselves and getting them hurting each other and putting each other down and everything is to distract from the real issues that need to be faced in the society and in the culture. And so it really is economically driven. But there's specific dynamics of how it works. In the case of psychiatric oppression, let me just say a couple of things. One is, key point is that psychiatry suppresses people, and suppresses especially their ability to heal by this natural built-in mechanism that we have called emotional discharge, emotional expression, verbal expression, talking it out. You know, psychiatric drugs and electroshock and other suppressive kind of actions.
I'll pause there about talking it out. I've said that the psychology is an illusion, that they actually help people. The people that, for a descriptive, become better, actually become better on their own, whether through their own efforts or whatever it is in their life is over, or even it just, what's important today is not important tomorrow. And what he's saying here about psychology is that it just keeps people in that, they capture people in that one particular state, and, well, they keep them there, and people never get better. And it's a lot harder because when people are stressed and they're not strong, you can sell them anything. And if you convince somebody,
I just wanted to add that if you convince somebody that they, say, have a mental illness or that they have committed a crime, for example, through repetition that you're guilty, or even as a victim.
that, well, hey, you know, and it's no different than when we look at these spirituality cults. People are searching for something, they're going through something in their lives, and you know, these cults will say, you know something, this is interdimensional, you've switched dimensions or whatever other stuff. It's the same idea, it's just different packaging.
Psychiatry act to suppress that dynamic. They suppress the ability to feel, they suppress the ability to think. Those are necessary in order to kind of liberate ourselves from various distress patterns and hurts and to be able to think more clearly and be more powerful in our actions. So that's a major effect of psychiatric oppression. Another one I call the magic trick. It's like voila, magic. You know, once you identify somebody as mentally ill, meaning they have a biological or genetic defect, according to that belief system of biological psychiatry, then you've absolved everybody from responsibility to think any further about what might really be going on. Because you've explained it. Oh, that child is attention deficit, or that person is clinically depressed, or oh, there's a schizophrenia person over there, right? Meaning they have an inherited genetic defect, or they have a chemical imbalance, or they have a neurological defect somehow. And that explains it. So then they just need the medicine to treat their illness.
So I'm just going to pause there for a moment. Where we, drawing the parallel of what he just said to my case, is it's basically called diverting. So they're diverting their responsibility and trying to make it my problem when it's actually their problem. Where we see this, for example, with feminism, they're diverting whatever it is individually or as the collective onto everybody else. And this is where men become victims of the struggle within the female hierarchy, the betas and omegas wanting to be equal to the alphas. And this is why we all scratch our heads, us normal people, and wonder, like, you know, they're saying don't objectify us, but then they objectify themselves, and you know, it doesn't make sense, because it's not a struggle between men and women, it's a struggle within themselves. The weaker wanting to be like the stronger rather than simply accept their genetic social standing. And now we see the same with this incel movement.
What might really be going on? You know, what might really be going on, and how our society and community is structured in such a way that we're creating distress in people. Aspect of psychiatric oppression. The third.
I'm going to pause here. What he's about to say. This one here is of particular interest, so pay attention.
Is that psychiatry acts to enforce the norms. I call it the enforcer. To enforce the norms of the culture. So if the norm is slavery, then a slave that runs away is given a psychiatric name. This is a true story. A doctor named Samuel Cartwright back in the 1840s created a new psychiatric illness called drapetomania. It means slaves who run away. And it's caused by the mental illness. It's not caused by the oppressive institution of slavery, right? So fast forward to today, a child is having trouble in a factory school and doesn't fit in for whatever reason. The problem is not with the factory schools and the community of support around that. The problem is that child has a neurological, biological defect called ADHD. It enforces the norms under the guise of medicine in this case.
So I just want to pause there under the guise. What we see, for example, okay, I'm going to draw the parallel to my case. So I'm not going along with the standard norm of, okay, these guys messed up, the whole police department messed up, everyone's messing up. What they're trying to impose, that I conform to the status quo of, you know, you can't fight City Hall, you can't beat the government. And because I keep fighting, you know, maybe some of these people actually think that I'm nuts in the legal system, the local legal system here, because it's like, well, why is this guy, you know, they fail to realize something. And this is going to tie into this next video that I'm going to do, go over what kind of people these people are. So, and then when you tie it into the feminist narrative and this whole trans thing and everything else, it's this belief system of psychology that really, really pushes it and creates all this other stuff and tries to make people feel guilty. And the more people that feel guilty and say, oh yeah, well, you know, yeah, I don't, you know, want to be sexist and everything else, then more people will just kind of like, because of the sheep mentality, will just start to follow eventually. And where you see the first people being affected by all this are the betas and the omegas of both male and female in the human gene pool. So being a weaker mind, the alphas just, you know, trudge along and whatever. So this is the parallel here with what he just said with his point 3.
So that's what we're talking about, oppression and some of the mechanisms of how it works, remembering that it's economically driven, of course. The pharmaceutical industries particularly profit immensely from this particular belief system and oppressive practice.
He keeps talking about profit. The court system, the police, and the correctional institutions, they're all profiting from having people on the conveyor belt. And, you know, some people they're comfortable with that. That's their life. That's who they are. That's who they want to be or whatever. Then you have a group that it's kind of in between. And then you have people like myself who are completely innocent. And there's lots of people, like Daniel Holtzclaw is one. I know a lot of people are anti-cop, and, you know, they don't care if he's innocent or guilty. I've read comments, you know, he got a taste of his own medicine. Well, apparently, I don't know if this guy, I don't know if he was a good cop or bad cop. That's not my whole point. You know, he is an innocent person, and just because he's or was a cop doesn't mean make him less human. So, but the system profits. Now, when we look at, say, feminism and even the men's rights movements and stuff like that, it's profit-based. And although the men's rights movement may not be as well funded as feminism, or at least not yet, there's still people profiting on writing books and doing talks and lectures and saying, you know, it's a battle between females and males and going off on all these tangents, which is not helping the cause. And it's usually the same type of people that we're talking about in this video and these other videos that are doing this. They're not helping, they're making things worse. So, anyway, moving along.
So it's natural when you have a form of oppression, whether it's race. Now then you have large numbers of those people mobilizing and saying, this care I was supposedly given in the name of benevolent medicine, I'm now calling it an atrocity, and I want to stop it and make sure it doesn't happen to other people.
Stopping it there, it doesn't happen to other people. So we see in the judicial system many innocent people convicted, accused, tried, and convicted. Okay, so we're going to end that video and we're going to go on to this next video. Now this next video is really well done, very well presented. It's on TED Talks, and it's an amazing story. So the first story is split into two parts, and the middle story is interesting because he talks about sociopaths. So take a listen.
And I said to him, can you prove to me that psychiatry is a pseudoscience that can't be trusted? And he said, yes, we can prove it to you. And I said, how? And he said, we can introduce you to Tony. And I said, who's Tony? And he said, Tony's in Broadmoor. Now, Broadmoor is Broadmoor Hospital. It used to be known as the Broadmoor Asylum for the Criminally Insane. It's where they send the serial killers and the people who can't help themselves. And I said to Brian, well, what did Tony do? And he said, hardly anything. He beat someone up or something, and he decided to fake madness to get out of a prison sentence, but he faked it too well, and now he's stuck in Broadmoor, and nobody will believe he's sane. Do you want us to try and get you into Broadmoor to meet Tony?
So I'm just going to pause there about meeting this guy. As I said earlier, it was suggested that that would be a way out for me to take this like a mental plea deal after I turned down two others, which were slaps on the wrist. I turned them down because I would have had to say sorry, which would be an admission to all this other peripheral stuff, which is, watch my other videos, it's not real, it's not truthful, it's false. So, and I didn't do anything even according to their own testimony. So when they came up, when this was presented to me, I'm like, hell no, because I already knew the long-term consequences. So you think about how many people say, oh yeah, I'll do it, and they screw up the rest of their lives. And this all ties back into, somebody who's just going through a hard time in their life that moment, and somebody says go see a shrink, they go see a shrink, and they spend the next 10 years dwelling on it, taking these stupid drugs and not getting any better. So one thing people have to remember is never be consumed by anything. You'll have your moment where you vent, whatever, but don't be consumed by anything. And when it's over, it's over. Learn from it. Those lessons you remember, but the actual event doesn't matter anymore. Just something to share with other people.
And then Brian said, here's Tony. And a man was walking in, and he wasn't overweight. He was in very good physical shape, and he wasn't wearing sweatpants. He was wearing a pinstripe suit, and he had his arm outstretched, like someone out of The Apprentice. He looked like a man who wanted to wear an outfit that would convince me that he was very sane. And he sat down, and I said, so is it true that you faked your way in here? And he said, yep, absolutely. I beat someone up when I was 17, And I was in prison awaiting trial, and my cellmate said to me, you know what you have to do? Fake madness. Tell him you're mad, you'll get sent to some cushy hospital, nurses will bring you pizzas, you'll have your own PlayStation. So I said, well, how did you do it? He said, well, I asked to see the prison psychiatrist, and I'd just seen a film called Crash, in which people get sexual pleasure from crashing cars.
So what he was saying is somebody else who may or may not have been part of the system, obviously not as a professional, had sold him on the idea to come up with this plea, an insanity plea or whatever. It made it all rosy and everything else. Now what they do as professionals is somebody's going through a hard time, you know, whether they can work or not, but they sell people saying, you know, you can get disability, you know, and it's basically free, easy money, and you don't have to, you know, check in or look for work or anything. It's just easy street. And that disability is so easy to get, absolutely easy, because the reality is the government and other people looking in are saying, well, we can't prove this either way. If you have a disability, a real physical disability, say like with what happened to me, and I mean, it's so hard. You gotta jump through hoop after hoop and everything else. It's almost like they want you to not apply. But the mental health disability and get money, easy. So that's how they lure people in. They say, oh, you know something? Just do it for 6 months. Do it for a year. And bingo. You're in. You gotta see a shrink, take the drugs, and your life is done. So, just wanted to share that.
Walls. So I said to the psychiatrist, I get sexual pleasure from crushing cars into walls. And I said, what else? He said, you know, they're always looking out for non-verbal clues to my mental state, but how do you sit in a sane way? How do you cross your legs in a sane way? It's just impossible. You know, when Tony said that to me, I thought to myself, am I sitting like a journalist?
The pause there by him saying impossible. So, say with my case, you have a few people trying to discredit me. So they don't have to be accountable or liable for their errors. And they start this gossip, this rumor in the legal community that there's something wrong with me. No one's wanting to listen. And when people end up talking to me who become part of this case, they say, I don't think there's anything wrong with you. Well, because their impression before meeting me is what they hear, true or false. And so they're already formulating how to talk to me, and just like what he's saying, well, they're going to be watching for these little cues, but you get the odd person who has their head screwed on relatively decent, and they're like, wait a second, there's nothing wrong with you. And I did a video about how the issues that I had with the provincial health care, and I talk about the same type of thing there, where within their own system, this is like real doctors, real medicine, real stuff, because of the information that was put on their main database about me with regards to the female, trying to protect her, because those two officers, one is no longer an officer, moved her to a different hospital and everything else. Everyone started to treat me differently in the city. I've only been in the city to deal with my injuries and stuff. And then when they start adding to that, compiling to that, and just making it worse on me, and to the point where like I used that one example in that video, I was tired, just minding my own business, trying to get through this medical thing, and this weirdo of a nurse technician started talking about, I'm getting a vibe from you. She had nothing else, but, well, I'm getting a vibe, and the whole thing fell apart. Watch that video for more details. And this is the problem. So, when I talk about busybodies, and then you have glorified busybodies like these professionals sticking their nose in other people's business, making uninformed conclusions. I mean, it destroys lives. It's like my whole point is, no matter what you say or do, when somebody puts you into the system or into a mindset, it's hard to get out. The same thing applies to CPIC, which has turned into the police's, their own private social media. So all you need to do is have some idiot pissed off at you or write their theory, whatever, and others read it and it's like, wow, okay. And then if they have to engage you, then they're treating you based on what they think they know about you, whether it's true or false. And a lot of people, maybe people watching this video, you ever get pulled over and wonder why this cop you've never seen before is just totally on your case? Now, it could be a bad day, yes, but remember, they have their little computers in their police vehicles. That's in Canada called CPIC. So they'll run your plate, figure out who you are before they even get out of the car, and if there's some slanderous thing that's not even proven, they're going to treat you that way, because that's what people do, is they make uninformed conclusions and act on it.
My legs like a journalist. He said, I've got the Stockwell Strangler on one side of me, and I've got the Tiptoe Through the Tulips rapist on the other side of me. So I tend to stay in my room a lot because I find them quite frightening. And they take that as a sign of madness. They say it proves that And when I got home, I emailed his clinician, Anthony Maiden. I said, what's the story? And he said, we accept that Tony faked madness to get out of a prison sentence because his hallucinations that had seemed quite cliche to begin with just vanished the minute he got to Broadmoor. However, we have assessed him and we've determined that what he is a psychopath. And in fact, faking madness is exactly the kind of cunning and manipulative act of a psychopath. It's on the checklist, cunning, manipulative. So faking your brain going wrong is evidence that your brain has gone wrong. Hare said the reason why is because capitalism at its most ruthless
They're
reward.
affecting us all. So he goes on and actually he talks about another individual specifically that he interviewed, and it's actually really interesting, but it's way too long. So he's talking about like psychopaths and sociopaths and everything. Well, when you look at the description of what that is, those type of people are, and what they do. When you look at, say, for example, and this is, I'm not saying all, okay? I'm just trying to make a point. When you look at people in the judicial system, whether it be the police, judges, lawyers, agents, whatever, what traits do they have? Now, take my case, for example, and I'm not saying all police. I'm not saying all judges, and I'm not saying all lawyers. I'm trying to just make a point, so, if you're going to comment, I don't care. We have one former officer and one, I think he's still an officer, I don't know, I haven't, my sources haven't told me anything more. They have no remorse. They actually, I remember them enjoying them when they were torturing me and beating me. I'll never forget. officer who is still an officer, he was actually, when he was looking at my right wrist and hand, had a little chuckle and just kind of shook it. And that's mentally ill. When you have a judge, trial judge, drag the case on and tease you with maybe hope. Not that I'm one that buys into hope, that's a different topic. Hope is the impossibility of reason, and just drags it on, torments you, and gets satisfaction from convicting and sentencing a wrongfully convicted person. That is a sickness. So what he's describing about capitalism and everything else, you see it very clearly in my case. And when you look at, when he was talking about how that trickles down, well, you could be, for example, the first couple of lawyers that I had, maybe even the third one. The third one was kind of special, but whatever. So that's why I want to get this part in, but then I want to skip to where he's talking about this guy who lied to avoid going to prison, and there's some key parts there, so just...
Psychopathic behaviour, the lack of empathy, the glibness, cunning, manipulative. In fact, capitalism, perhaps at its most remorseless, is a physical manifestation of psychopathy. It's like a form of psychopathy that's come down to affect us all. And Hare said to me, you know what, forget about some guy at Broadmoor who may or may not have fake madness. Who cares? That's not a big story. The big story, he said, is corporate psychopathy. You want to go and interview yourself some corporate psychopaths. So I gave it a try, wrote...
Okay, so I'm going back to where the speaker gets back to London.
When I got back to London, Tony phoned me. He said, why haven't you been returning my calls? I said, well, they say that you're a psychopath. And he said, I'm not a psychopath. He said, you know what, one of the items on the checklist is lack of remorse, but another item on the checklist is cunning manipulative. So when you say you feel remorse for your crime, they say, typical of the psychopath, to cunningly say he feels remorse, but he doesn't. It's like witchcraft. They turn everything upside down. He said, I've got a tribunal coming up. Will you come to it? So I said, okay. So I went to his tribunal, and after 14 years in Broadmoor, they let him go. They decided that he shouldn't be held indefinitely because he scores high on a checklist that might mean...
One of the things that come to mind is there was a time where people were condemned for witchery, being witches, because maybe they drank herbal tea to become better. And they had, no matter what these people said or did, even through the type of trials that they had, and if, you know, you're wondering what I'm talking about, look up Salem witch trials and stuff. It's craziness. But no matter what these people did, everyone thought they were a witch, and they were never able to shake that. And today, we replaced witchery with insane. And then we have all these other labels that are coming from this belief system of psychology to help do what they did during the witch trials. Soon after the May 4th, 2013 event, when I was in the hospital, and I had to, once I left, I had to keep going back because the swelling was so bad. I think it was several months. They couldn't get images of my injuries, the bones or anything. That's how bad the swelling was, and for that long. during one of the times there, the initial times there, I was talking to a worker, and they said, yes, you have serious post-traumatic stress. And I'm quite aware of it. One of the biggest problems, before I go off on another thought, is that this case has gone on for years now, and I keep having to relive it, keep having to hear the falsehoods, keep having to hope, I'm using that word, someone believes me. Not that people don't. Friends do, people that I've come in contact do, people that I've met throughout this time, whether, you know, I share a lot of my information. A lot of people have my file incomplete, up to date. I can't even count how many. But even people who don't have all that, you know, they believe me. It's just, I guess for me, I'm struggling with it's impacting me. This whole thing is just, it's almost as if they're trying to drive me crazy, hoping that I would snap. And here I am. And just for the record, I'm going to see this through to the end. So, my final point with this video is going to be talking about, people have been posting videos. There's one particular video where some guy he's fighting, it appears he's fighting half a dozen cops, or they're fighting him. We don't know. There's no backstory. And my comments have been like, what's the backstory? Is this guy an innocent person defending himself, or what's going on? Regardless, a lot of people are saying, well, you know something? Let the police do whatever they're going to do and have your day in court. And these people don't realize, you know, they might say, oh, you know, I had my little thing with the police, whatever, you know, maybe they were guilty, who knows? But really, who in their right mind would go toe-to-toe the distance against odds which are so stacked against the individual, spending years going through the court system, having your personal and professional reputation destroyed, spending countless tens of thousands of dollars, and the stress. Most people don't fight that. It's like, whatever, I just want this to go away. It's so easy for people to say, you know, well, you'll have your day in court, you know. These are fools. These are words of a fool. I have no problem saying that. And yes, until you have experienced it, you have nothing to say. Nothing. All these years that they've tortured me with this case, well, someone told me, well, at least they got their pound of flesh. Well, I didn't owe them a pound of flesh. Perhaps I am crazy. Perhaps I am crazy for going the distance in this fight against next to impossible odds. But you know something? This fight's not just for me. Because other people will benefit from this. And there's already signs over the past several years with articles in the newspaper and in Parliament where at least this particular city is under a lot of scrutiny. Their police are under a lot of scrutiny. And even their own within, the good ones, are coming forward. So this fight is more than just vindicating myself now. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. And by the way, if I look really dopey, it's because I'm tired. I again, I haven't been sleeping very well, not at all last night, so I'm just really tired and I really struggled to get through this video. So I apologize, for if I look tired or sounds like I'm mumbling. But I think this is a very important video to do, not just for me, but again for everybody else, and not just about the type of matter that I'm dealing with, but for society overall.